When Peter Bissonnette was a child, he was frequently locked in a closet, left to comfort himself, told he was ugly by his mother, and yet he still tapped into this deep faith within himself and outside of himself that led him to the top of a family communications company that he scaled to a multi-billion-dollar corporation. And he didn't achieve that through being ruthless or power hungry. He did it through many powerful life lessons that led him to adopt the philosophy of becoming what he would consider a good shepherd. Peter is the former president of Shaw Communications, a multi-billion-dollar Canadian family enterprise. And he's also the author of the book Count on Me, My Life Lessons and Legacy as a former president of Shaw Communications. And in this episode, he shares a story that left me stunned. And what struck me most was how Peter didn't just survive. His experiences transformed him and those around him into better people. He built a belief in himself and others, and he carried that belief into the boardrooms, into leadership, and into legacy. So if you've ever questioned whether you're enough to lead a family business, or if the wounds from your past might be holding you back, this episode is going to hit home for you. But before we begin, if you want to keep learning more about how to build a business that thrives on love, legacy, and lifestyle, hit the subscribe button. Enjoy the show. Strengthen the love, the legacy, and the lifestyle in your family business. This is Fearless Family Business. Peter, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here. I've been really excited about this ever since Damon introduced us.
Well, likewise, Adam. Thanks. In fact, I've watched you and Damon in your one of your guesting appearances, and it was really helpful for me to understand where you're coming from and what you're all about. And I have a very small slice of life, but I'm really looking forward to this our conversation.
As am I, and yeah, we're speaking of Damon Lemby, who's a mutual friend of ours who seems to know a lot of really amazing people, and I get introduced to a lot of amazing people through Damon and Peter Bissonnette. You are one of them, and your story is really profound. And I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people here because you grew up in humble beginnings. A lot of family businesses start in humble beginnings, and a lot of and a lot of those grow into something pretty fantastic. And you came from humble beginnings, worked your way through a variety of different amazing, parts of your life to land at a multi-billion-dollar communications company in Canada and running that company and taking those life skills into running that. And we're going to kind of cover a lot of that today, but I'd love to hear maybe some of the start of where your journey began, back when you were young. What was and how you kind of transitioned into those humble beginnings into somebody that maybe wanted to become more and serve more.
Yeah, that's well. First of all, thank you. And the humble beginnings I didn't even think of them as humble beginnings. I was one of 7 children. My mother was a nurse in the Navy, and my father was a major in the Canadian Army. Mm-hmm. They had met in England where my mom was living in Farnborough, and they fell in love, and he took her back to Canada, and lo and behold, they had 7 children, and it was
wow,
a whirlwind time. That she came from 21 years old, and all of a sudden she's in Canada, this freezing country that she was unfamiliar with, and she was all of a sudden in the midst of creating another family of 7, and she came from a family of 11, as did my father. So we lived in Ottawa when I was born in Ottawa, and we lived there, and it was amazing. There was my mother, and I sort of attribute this to maybe the rapidity with which she had a family, but and postpartum. She wasn't the most encouraging for me, and from early on, I talk about it in my book that there were times when she would confine me in a closet and for something I had done, and she was she would openly tell me that I was the ugliest baby she'd ever had.
Jeez.
So things like that, and so I found it challenging because I had brothers and sisters, and so we used to chat and laugh and play and do all the things that children do. And they even recognized that there was something different about the way my mother kind of communicated with me as she did with them. So anyway, there was I won't call it the most encouraging kind of period in my life, but interesting enough, we moved from Ottawa to Calgary, and in Calgary, when I was 4 years old, I actually went to a mini boarding school. So very young, I learned that there is life outside of the family. And then ultimately, we moved to England. My father was posted to Farnborough, where my mother's hometown was, and so they essentially had sent my two younger sisters to England 2 years beforehand, and I think it was because they were a bit tough. My mom was having struggles in terms of managing all these children, all very, very young. Like we were all 8 years within each other. So when we came to England, the first thing that really happened was we were put into a boarding school, and as much as that was tough, and the teachers there were also Augustinian monks, and in those days we're talking about 1954 here now, so not that far removed from WW2.
Sure, right.
And the things were tough. There were still people kind of getting over the wars and everything else. So the boarding school was about 300 young boys, anywhere from my age, I was, I think, 8 years old at the time, to 16-year-old boys, and living in a boarding school environment, and being a Canadian who they referred to as a Yankee, and they didn't do it with love. Right. They saw me as kind of an odd boat, because I was a Yankee. I kept saying I'm a Canuck, and so but making my way and finding a way to make friends and to participate in things that we all did, like playing football, and what's football, I mean soccer, and rollerblading, and just doing what children do. I made good friends and was able to thrive, if you will, in the boarding school environment. Even though, and we used to come home maybe 2 or 3 times a year, and I found that actually I did better in the boarding school environment. There was more encouragement from the teachers that I had there than I did at home. And
oh wow,
because when I came back, it was still kind of the same drama, and my father was a military person, and he wasn't the most loving. He was strict.
Right.
And I think he loved us all, but he still had a kind of a military strictness about him. He had been a regimental sergeant major, and those are the ones that kind of take non-commissioned people and they make soldiers out of them. And so, they were tough as bricks. Wow. Anyway, so in boarding school, I was put in the same class as my older brother, and no doubt, because they thought I was only being a year apart. A year is a big difference in terms of your learning and your cerebral development, et cetera, et cetera. So I wouldn't do as well as my brother, and that was always a challenge for my mom. She thought that I was probably more interested in sports than books, and that I was not going to do well in life. She called me kind of a meathead and things like that. So.
That kind of interests, I wanted to kind of touch on something there too, because something struck me in the first part of the book too, that you'd mentioned when she would put you in the closet, and a lot of kids obviously would see that as being kind of an abandonment, and perhaps it was for you, but I was struck by how you said you found this level of comfort in yourself. You hugged your knees, you almost found comfort with yourself, which seemed like a unique kind of way that to deal with that situation. How kind of, maybe can you touch on that, or maybe expand on that a little bit? Yeah, I'd love to hear more on how you came to that.
Well, it's interesting. The working title of my book was "Have Faith in Yourself, Believe in Yourself," and from a very young age, I remember being confined in that closet and not understanding why I was there, but I had somehow, I don't know if it was an inner strength, but I said, I believe in myself. I believe in myself. I'm not as stupid as she thinks I am. I'm I had siblings that would encourage me. I had an older sister that was somewhat protective, and within, we're children are kind of powerless at times. I mean, you don't create your own destiny, but within sort of 24 hours a day, there is a part of yourself that is you, and so I found that I found actually solace in the fact that I was kind of surviving even in that kind of, I'll call it, not the most positive kind of environment. And so in this quietness of being alone, and there were many times I was alone. I was put in my room, put in the closet, and those kinds of things. I found strength in the fact that I actually survived those, and that there was still, it wasn't for something I could point my finger at in terms of why I was there. It was more of a concern about my mother. And I think, after, as you see later on in the book, there was a reconciliation about 20 years later where she phoned me when I was working at the telephone company, and she was crying. And she said, Peter, can you ever forgive me for treating you the way I treated you? And her own sister, was a positive force in my life, my Auntie Rosemary, used to chastise her for being so, you shouldn't have favorites in children. Each of them is individuals, and each of them have individual strengths. And to this day, when I look at somebody and somebody says, boy, that's a bit of an odd person, looking for the good in people is really a powerful, I won't call it a skill, but it's a powerful way of bringing positive out of people. And I would just say, as much as somebody might appear to be different, if you could find one good thing about somebody and then really celebrate that, you'd be amazed at how farther that goes. All of a sudden, you're finding two things and three things, and you say, "Wow, I kind of like the way that person seems to, reciprocate with me, and we seem to get along." And it's because of the kind of that encouragement that really is powerful in life. And so, to the extent that I found that in other avenues, I found it in some of the priests that actually taught me in boarding school that looked at me in a way that was positive. They saw me as athletic. They saw me as a person that loved to compete, somebody that was interested in life, I played well as well. And I had, friends that looked at me as somebody that they liked to be around. And so words of encouragement, the power of those really became more evident to me because they were like little juices, like good fruit, good food. Sure. And so nourishing. So that I drew from those words of encouragement. And even as I said, with my sisters, they used to laugh about it sometimes. Well, because it was so adroit that, but even young siblings could see that there was something wrong here. And so I think I took strength from that as well.
Wow. Yeah, it's a powerful story. I mean, and I feel like not a lot of, I mean, just the fact that you were able to find that faith in yourself and tap into those who were being more encouraging, and kind of moving back into when you were in boarding school. Now you are, did that kind of shape you into wanting to move into maybe the seminary and kind of take that spiritual route?
Yeah. No, it wasn't in the boarding school that happened.
Okay.
The boarding school helped me to realize that there were things that I could achieve. And so I was developing self-confidence. My reading skills were probably the biggest concern for my mom, but I actually found that they were probably, when I learned to read, very powerful, and those have served me well in my life. I remember, as I said, when my father wasn't the most loving, I did find mentors. And I remember my Uncle Peter, who was a fashion designer in living in Vancouver when I made the trip from Ottawa to Vancouver to make a career change, where I had no money, no job, and he put me up. But he was a huge believer in me. And in fact, I think he was the one behind the scenes that said to his sister, my mother, you've got a beautiful son. He's wonderful. He's been in the Air Force. He's done very well there. And he may have a job here in a month. And so I think that he advocated for me in a way that essentially made my mother have second thoughts about, well, perhaps he isn't as big adult as I'm. and maybe she found something in me that she could actually look to as being really positive, and as opposed to somebody who'd left the seminary, who'd
Right.
left the Air Force, and was now, in Vancouver.
Yeah.
So that he was a mentor. And then in business, like when I was at BC Tel, I had technical skills. And I started from the bottom as a toll switchman. But there was a supervisor, Tom Porteous, who had a huge impact on me. He saw something in me that I didn't even see. And he said to me one day, Peter, how would you like to come and work for me on this switch? And it was one of the switches that, was a complex analog switch that he saw that I had sort of technical capabilities. He also saw that I worked hard. I had a certain work ethic that
Right.
he really wanted to have. And he had older people working with him. When I say older, I was 21, 22. Some of them were 25, 30, 35 years old at the time. And so they were more mature. And he just thought that I would make a good addition to his team. And so he chose me. I was overcome. I said, Tom, I've heard only good things about you as a supervisor. I'd love to come and work with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did. And to the extent that, again, I would never let him down. He essentially acknowledged his trust in me to come and work on this switch. And I told him I would never let him down. And so my work ethic, the work ethic within the group, some people they weren't in there to do a lot of work.
Right.
It was more sort of a passing fancy being at work. And so I took upon myself that Tom, trusted me. And so to the extent we had tickets that were customer service focused or things were broken in the switch that needed to be looked at, I took it really seriously. And I tried to model myself after him. But it was interesting through the course of doing that amongst my peers, some of them started to, actually, when you work hard, the day goes by quite quickly. And there's a certain feeling, a sense of accomplishment when you actually are able to successfully fix issues that are affecting customers throughout all of British Columbia. So there was an opportunity for me to both reflect my loyalty to Tom, my gratitude to Tom, but also set an example for my coworkers.
Yeah. I love that. That work ethic was, do you think that work ethic came from the variety of experiences you had? Because you had so many different experiences, obviously growing up in the environment, getting mentors, becoming a priest, and then, going to the Air Force. You had all of that kind of foundation of different experiences. Did all of that lead to your work ethic, or do you think that was kind of just in your DNA?
I think it contributed for sure, because I look at sports as also no different business. So I played soccer, and when you're in boarding school, you have when we have 8 hours a day of playtime, like sports time. So I played soccer, and I loved being a part of a team. I loved the dynamics of a team. When you're playing left wing and you could pass the ball to the center forward or whatever,
Right.
or if you're in goal and you're the last kind of bastion, and the sense of accomplishment you get if you can do something right for the team. So I think the work, and I thrust myself into sports to the point where I've had 6 shoulder surgeries from my hockey days. I just loved it so much because there was a certain dynamic, a certain sharing of accomplishment. There's a goal orientation to it, and so I think my work ethic came from my love of sports, my love of being part of a team, and making sure that I was accountable and I was making my contributions to the success of the team. So if they passed the ball to the left wing, I didn't just kind of meander over there. So I think that was a good part of it. So the boarding school taught me teammanship, how you build relationships, respect. Even amongst 8-year-olds, there was a certain respectful kind of behavior that you could see actually was effective.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that, then that kind of brought you into this world. Like, I want kind of shifting gears back into your progression through your career and moving back in, because you started working for a variety of family businesses as you started out. You started at the very bottom, and then you made some decisions down that path to make some changes. But What was it that drew you to, family business in particular that really drove you
Yeah.
to want to continue down that path?
I found that, well, the first family business I worked with was Rogers, and Ted Rogers was, they used to call him the kind of the titan of cable. He founded that company, and he was a he was a huge risk taker. He put it all on the line, and he and his company had a culture that was it was aggressive and growing, and they were risk averse, and or actually they were banker averse. They basically took risks that not many people would take, and this was Ted's vision of how he could build this company. And so I worked for Rogers for 5 years, and there were I loved the dynamics of because we were going through a technological change. I guess my whole career, that's been one of the sort of backdrops is this technological change going from analog equipment to tubes to, large scale integration,
Right.
all the way to, what we're doing now with satellites and cable and fiber optics, et cetera. So I loved what he did from a technological point of view because I was a technician by nature. In terms of kind of the way that we worked together, there were silos within the company that I thought were probably dysfunctional, and so I tried to break those silos down. In fact, when I worked in Vancouver, the headquarters for Rogers were in Toronto, and so we had this dynamic of the blue bloods in Toronto and the group in Vancouver as being different. And I said, that doesn't serve us well here in Vancouver to be considered different. We need to be a part of the team. And I guess that's the whole. And so to the extent that I could bridge that gap, if you will, of 3,000 miles, but through traveling to Toronto, meeting with the technical people, the positions across the country that I served as an operations manager. And so I became known. There were certain aspects of what I became known for, and Dave and Steve McDonald had a private company, a cable company, the same thing in Vancouver. It was the largest multi-system operator that was that was independent, if you will. They were a family, and so they approached me one day to join their family company, and I went, "Wow, I've respected these guys because I'd worked with them on the sidelines, and I actually visualized one day working for them." And when Steve phoned me one day and he said, "Dave and I'd love to meet you." It was just during our labor dispute too, so there was a lot of energy going on
Oh yeah.
in our lives. There was a labor dispute at Rogers that had been going on. It was acrimonious. I was part of the negotiating team that was trying to bring this thing to a conclusion. So anyway, through the course of working as a part of the negotiating team, I had the privilege of meeting Dave and Steve McDonald. And when they asked me if I would, they told me that they were looking at maybe stepping away from the business in terms of their active operational presence, and they were looking for somebody to lead the company. And I went, "Holy doodle. I can't, it was almost like the skies opened up. There was this providential move, something I'd visualized myself doing,
Right.
and here I was being offered this job. And so I absolutely said, I would love to do that. I'd be honored to do it. And to the extent that they trusted me with this opportunity, I also affirmed for them that I would never let them down. And so, the work ethic was there, but also I had moved away from my sort of technical focus to much more administrative, relationship-based kind of management, and my leadership skills were still in a sort of an evolving state, but they were getting to be much more like a consistent. And so the Good Shepherd was something that really was important to me when I was in the seminary. I was to look at the Good Shepherd as somebody that you could actually look to. He was a protector. He had his flock, and he was there to make sure that at night the wolves and whatever other vermin were out there, wouldn't harm his sheep. And so to the extent that kind of modeled for me what I could do given my leadership role, that I could create a work environment where our employees felt really safe, that they felt that there was opportunities to grow within the company, that there was opportunities to really enjoy each other through the course of what, work isn't just work. Work is also, transactional, relationship-based. and to set the tone in terms of we were growing quickly. We were the fastest growing company in Canada at the time, but still small, relatively small. And so my whole raison d'etre in terms of my management style was to ensure that what they entrusted me to run their company and to do it in as an enlightened as way as I could. And so it was clear to me that there were still some communications weaknesses, if you will, amongst the senior leadership. And so I spent a lot of time working with organizational psychologists to talk about how we could improve communications with leaders. And the transformation and just learning the skills of communications, respecting each other, don't carrying get back. A lot of people carry baggage from 3 or 4 or 5 years back or 10 years back. Getting rid of that baggage, and it was funny because that came from my experience in the monastery. Was once a week these monks would get together, very austere, and they would basically, I hate to use the word flagellate, but they would talk about their faults and their vulnerabilities, and they would ask the other monks to help them to be better. And I thought, wow, let's talk about being vulnerable.
Right.
And so to the extent that, I was still in a learning mode, I was more of a technical person. I prided myself on my relationship skills. I had been a computer programmer in a time, so I understood what IT folks were going through. And so reaching out to them and just trying to understand what was important to them really set the tone, if you will. And I had an unbelievable administrative person who knew all the staff very well and who told them, you can trust Peter. She was my sort of, if you will, administrators are the key to these companies.
Yeah.
And and I played sports with them. I played baseball on their team. So to the extent that you could find common interests, people understand that you put your pants on the same way they do in the morning. There's nothing unique about being a leader other than we all, as I learned later on with my next family, with J.R. Shaw, was we're all equal. We just have different roles and responsibilities. And wow, what a powerful message to hear from the founder of a company that we are, and to actually live that. So I've just transitioned to Shaw, and moving into that company, they knew me from my because we were all a part of the Lower Mainland of Vancouver's, milieu. And so we all knew each other from the way each other's companies were going, and we looked at each other and said, I wonder how they're doing at Western, how they're doing at Shaw, how they're doing at Rogers. So JR after Rogers actually ended up buying Western, and so after 3.5 years, and I was settling in my mind that this was going to be a long-term career at Western, and we were going to make great things happen. And we had done some pretty unique, had some pretty unique initiatives. I was feeling more comfortable about the banking side of the business, about the whole budgeting, capital budgeting, and working within our means. And JR, the founder of Shaw, we'd had a chance to work with them on a kind of a joint project, and they got a sense of what my strengths were and how I could actually help them through the course of moving to Shaw. Shaw was about 400 employees at the time, maybe $100 million in revenue.
Wow.
And Jim and JR said to me that we want you to come to the company because we're all about growing. We want to grow through new products, but we want to also grow through acquisitions. And at the time, there were many small operating companies that were looking to get out of the business because it was becoming too capital intensive, if you will. And the financial side of building a plant was something that really didn't fit within their own family plans. And so we ended up, so I came to them on the basis that would be my role. And from day one, we hit the start, and we started buying companies, and JR and Jim were masters. I mean, Jim at the time he kept me on my toes because he was a futurist, if you will, and he was looking at things that we could do to be much more, to have enduring relationships with our customers. It was resonating with me because it was music to my ears. I hated disappointing customers. And so to the extent that was something that Jim and I held in common, is that and the whole company did, frankly, just by virtue of I call it the messaging that was sent out from to the various departments, the way we structured ourselves. We had customer service departments in all of our systems in Canada. We never had offshore customer service. We wanted our service rates to be our own customers as well. So we shared the same passion, if you will, for customer service. And so anyway, I don't know if you want to interrupt me for anything.
Oh yeah. No, I think that's great because I think because I was jotting down some notes there that you were pointing out a lot of commonalities within family businesses too. I mean, when you started even in that process of getting into families and starting to turn it around and getting curious, and I love the idea that you almost took this. It seems like you took this humble approach to I'm not a knower. I'm the person who is going to learn, and I'm going to apply to grow it. So, you talked about kind of improving the communication, letting go of some of the baggage, building some relatability, all common themes within family business, and almost making it more human. Do you feel like that was the aspect that kind of made the difference of helping you to become more successful in those families and those businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, JR his reputation was as a father
Sure.
and a founder. He was a tough businessman, but we had Shaw Bears was one of his initiatives. We used to call them trauma bears. So we had these Shaw Bears, all white with blue little things, and we gave them in all of the communities we served. We gave them to the ambulances and to the police. And if there was ever a child in trauma, they had these little bears to give to them. And I remember my son at the time, when I gave him, he was 4 or 5 years old, I gave him one of those bears. And he said to me, he's now 38 years old working for Rogers, but he said how important that was, that little bear, because, he'd gone through some difficult times himself, how important that bear was to give him comfort. So that was something. And JR he was almost religious about these bears, but also in terms of the we company, we weren't an I company.
Right.
And he even had on his cards, we are, there was no we in team, or there's no I in team, but we actually lived that value.
Yeah.
And so to the extent that in some of my previous experiences in business that there was almost competition between leaders for the light. And I said, our role as leaders is to shine the light. We don't run to the light. And so to the extent that was something that was encouraged by JR and almost celebrated, really, it felt so, for me, so comfortable. I mean, I'd been through the seminary, I'd been in boarding school, and it was all about relationships and how we kind of correlated with each other. And JR, he was the master, if you will. He was a father. He loved his children, and he shared that with us too. I mean, I was at so many I'll call them business meetings, but where JR actually started crying when he was talking about his family, and when he was talking about how he came into the business, and he started at the bottom. He was in the pipe coating business, and then he basically moved into his interest in cable because he was living in Edmonton, and they had one off-air channel.
Oh, wow.
But he used to cry with pride, if you will, that his family, his two sons, Jim and Brad, and his two daughters, Heather and Julie, that they could actually make a life in his company that he had founded. And they would be, and he was so proud that they all started at the bottom. They learned customer service from the bottom. They learned the technical side from digging shovels and trenching and all the kinds of things you need to do. Heather had gone to school and she had her MBA, and she ultimately took over the whole media side of the business. We were now growing to the point where we were scaling, and so scaling became the challenge. Of scaling was how do we continue the same family values when you've actually taken on more employees than you already have existing. So that my role was almost the ambassador of values. Yeah. And I took that seriously. And Bill McDonald, who was our HR vice president, he and I had I used to say that he reminded me of Father John Bosco, who all the kids in the schoolyard used to be attracted to because he was respectful to them, and he helped them to coexist together. So there were all of those kinds of connections for me of family. while I was working with Shaw. And then the people, the senior leadership team, they all were cut with the same cloth.
Right.
They understood that we were there to make each other successful. So we weren't there to one-up each other. We used to share in the joys of the kinds of accomplishments that we would experience working as a senior leadership team. We had high expectations. We were renowned as a company that was very cost effective, cost efficient. So we got things done, but we got things done in a business perspective with margins that were probably the leading margins within the industry because of the way we did things and the example that JR had set when we first came there in terms of every penny is like a manhole cover. They're hard to lift. So, don't just throw them. Don't be frivolous about pennies.
Right.
And the rest will follow. He was very, very supportive of whatever the capital necessary to grow the business, to give better levels of customer service, to satisfy because we grew from 0 internet customers to 1 million in 2 years.
Jeez, wow.
So it was just unbelievable growth.
Yeah.
And so anyway, and of course to do that, you have to do it with a team. And
Right.
I was, you talk about vulnerability. I was vulnerable when we used to get together in budgeting. I always, and I think it was surround yourself with the best possible people. And so we would find CFOs that were the best of the possible people, engineering managers, engineering leaders, IT. We had, a person, Zoran, who the need was, I could tell that we were growing so fast that our back office systems were really, they were, for me, a risk point. So we found this person almost like he was delivered to us from the heavens,
Right.
who, brought us into a level of achievement that we were able to support the business as it grew. So, but it was all done in support of advocacy for each other.
Yeah. And you were the first, were you the first non-family CEO at Shaw? Is that correct?
I was. So I was the president, not the CEO.
No, I'm sorry, the first president.
Yes, I was and I'll tell you the pride I had. It was a board meeting, and Jim Shaw. I used to attend the board meetings, and I would give the operational reports. And I remember Jim said, to the board, he said, "So Peter's going to talk about the operations, but before he does, I want you to know that he's now the president of Shaw Communications." I couldn't wipe the smile off my face.
Right.
I went red because I was blushing. And I said to them, I can't tell you how proud I am proud and humbled by what you've done, and I will never let you down.
Yes.
And so that was my commitment to the board and to the family.
Yeah.
And to the extent that I think that I lived that, that mandate. Here I am enjoying my life in Kelowna. Now having left the company, retired in 2015.
I love that. That's so great. And you mentioned being the ambassador of the values. So I think I know the answer to this next question in some ways, but being that, first kind of maybe bringing in that non-family perspective. I know that, I just talked with a couple of family businesses, one that was 147 years in before they brought in their first non-family CEO or president. And then they, our company ourselves, we were over 100 years old before we brought somebody non-family. And that's a big change. And I can imagine being a non-family president in that lead role, having to navigate that change, that dramatic change and that growth can have a lot of stress or a lot of maybe there's challenges that come with that. I'm curious to know how you navigated that and how you brought the team together amidst some of that.
Yes. Well, it was, first of all, for the support from JR and his wife, Carol, who, by the way, I attended her funeral last week. And so she's the matriarch. JR passed a couple of years ago, but they were, so as parents, so they had, I used to amaze myself as how does a family share it? Because we were a publicly traded company. How does a family unselfishly share itself to, I'll call outsiders, like senior leaders within the company? And so we had a perspective into the family that was, I call it privileged. And so there were things that we knew about what's going on in the family that we were privileged and they were transparently opening up to us. So we knew, more about the family than most people did, and we took that as a privilege, and we respected it. But the family, so Jr. and Carol embraced me, and they embraced me. Jim and Brad, the two boys. One of them was Jim was a CEO, I was a president, and Brad he became the CEO. After he became my boss ultimately. But so I prided myself on there was a dynamic between two brothers that clearly in a family that was growing the way it was, there was a dynamic that I really thrived on, because it was, how can we, the three of us, the three amigos, work together to support the company, to make JR proud of what we were doing. And he was an awfully proud founder and father. And I think when he talked about that pride is when I see the tears welling up in his face, that his kids were actually living and making a living in this and contributing in a significant way to the success of the company. And then, as I said, the senior leaders also created the path, if you will. I remember saying to people I used to love to chat with our staff, and we would have regular meetings, and I would talk about our values, and our values were, well, first of all, the underpinning one was caring. And if you care enough about customers, if you care enough about your shareholders, and you care enough about all your colleagues, though that is the most profound value I think that you can, because the rest kind of flow from it, whether it's integrity, accountability. So we weren't ashamed or shy to talk about our values amongst ourselves. When there were times, as I alluded to, that where Jim was going through some challenges, and the management team, and he wouldn't show up because he was dealing with some other issues, and so we took upon ourselves to keep the boat going. Right. They could count on us to do what was necessary. When we were at that time starting to spend like $800 million a year in capital. I mean, that had to come from somewhere, and the board trusted us that we made wise decisions, that we weren't flamboyant about what we were buying. We weren't golden nutting everything. We were doing what was necessary to keep the company in a prominent position, in a positive position with our customers. So we offered internet services that were second to none at the time. We had customer service people that were all from the communities that we served. And we had people, we used to have 5 customers a day. 5 customers a day. I would get a list from our back office system people, and as did all the other senior leaders, and we would call those customers. And I'd say, "Hi, good Mr. Smith, how are you today? My name is Peter Bissonnette. I'm the president of Shaw, and I'm just wondering, how did we do today?" Because they just had their service provided. Were there things that we could have done better? Right. And they said, "You're the president, and you're calling me?" Yes, I am the president, and I am calling you because I care. Right. And it was amazing how, we were all about enduring relationships. We probably were in the most competitive communities in North America, because the telephone companies were aggressively trying to get into our business, whereas in the U.S. they weren't quite there yet. It was the cable guys had their territory, and the telephone guys had theirs. In Canada, it was all about dog eat dog, and the telephone companies were coming strong. So we had to be the best of the best, and so to the extent that we were in this competitive environment, we were actually better for it. But we felt a sense of team accomplishment as we continued to grow, in spite of the what was going on with the competition.
Yeah,
and real business. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, no,
real practical business dynamics, but doing it in an enlightened way, really. And even the regulator looked to Shaw as being somebody that they would encourage us to appear before them, because I think they saw the quality, if you will, of JR, and the quality of the people that we had representing our company when we were looking at regulatory, the approvals on acquisitions and the like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I think that's a great point. You were able to be a great company, a business, but also be a human company. And I love that aspect in a world where many of those great big companies are trying to be less human, and especially now. I think humanity always wins. I feel that way. I don't know about you. Yeah.
Well, since the book has come out, I've had so many employees reach out to me. We've obviously been promoting it. But I had a letter from a lady who was the vice president of our company and left long before we sold to Rogers, and she was going through a difficult period, and she wrote to me saying how much she appreciated that I would write my story. She said her husband had just left her, frankly, and she had looked at my book, and she said she photographed some of the paragraphs where I was describing, some of the challenges that we were meeting and overcoming. And I actually mentioned her in my book as being somebody that was a part of this team that we were also proud of. And
Oh, wow.
and so to get that feedback, it made the legacy, if you will, because this was a legacy project for me, and my co-writer Lucy Linsky. This was a legacy project, and to hear the kind of feedback that we've had, and it was all about values.
Right.
I mean, and Brad became this after Jim passed away in about 2011 or 12. Brad said to me, "You should be the next CEO." I said, "Brad, you're Brad. I'm Peter. My role is to do everything I can to make you the most successful CEO we can." And so, to the extent that that there was no other motive for me than to make him successful, I didn't pose a risk to him. It was almost a marriage made in heaven, that whatever insights I had over my 60 years of experience on this earth, they were going to go to helping Brad to be successful. And he had the same DNA as his father. He was an empathetic. He was a perfectionist in terms of, he understood. He said, "I'm vulnerable. I don't really know this. I don't need that. I don't do that." And when people are vulnerable, wow, people are there to support them and to fulfill the kinds of needs that they have for their own development. And he was an unbelievable CEO before the company was sold. So having the privilege of that, they're still in my life. I'm on the board of the Shaw Family Trust, and it's a continuum. Even though JR has passed now and Jim has passed and Carol, there is still a continuum that we're now into the fifth generation of so about how generationally things can diminish.
Absolutely. Yeah.
He said to me, I want there to be opportunities 100 years from now from people that are from my generation, if you will, from my family. Absolutely. And he put the infrastructure in place with the family trust to make that happen and to provide them with the fruits of his labor.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to talk about the book, Count on Me, My Life Lessons and Legacy as a former president of Shaw Communications, which is the book that's out now, and that's the memoir you wrote. I do want to touch on that trust, though, that you're talking about, because I know that there's a lot of multi-generational family leaders out there that would love to make a generational trust that would support generations for opportunities for them without maybe giving entitlements or anything like that or things.
Yes.
I'd love to hear your perspective as somebody sitting on that board. What are some of the best practices that you're maybe implementing to make sure that happens? Yeah.
Well, there is, so there's a board, and then there's also actually, JR created a family management team. And the family management team are both outsiders, who've been with the company for a long time, who were trusted by the family, who actually run the activities so there are children that go from 1 year old to 25 years old. And so there are different phases of their lives. And some of them have worked for Shaw in beginning roles, and they're just getting their feet wet. But so they've created opportunities, now that the company is no longer, it's basically just a investment portfolio.
Right.
But there are opportunities for those next generations to actually entrepreneurship. So are there seeds of entrepreneurs within that, the group of grandchildren that we can help, that we can encourage, that we can train, that we can develop? And so there are outside parties that come into the family to provide the kind of family counsel that helps the generations, if you will, to understand what they are a part of and how they can actually make their way in life. And these are not endowments. These are, if you work hard and you show a propensity to succeed at certain things, whether it's in the arts, whether it's a financial position, whatever it is, that there's resources within the trust to help you to help to support you doing that. And so it's JR didn't want to have people that just basically end up with a bunch of money, and then he wanted to create a foundation for them for generations after generations to succeed. And we're seeing it already. We're seeing the benefits of that. They're all, there's some that just finished universities. They've got a strong interest in business. Some of them are actually, doing really well in the telecommunications side of the businesses, working for non-family kind of organizations, but having had the experience to work, having worked with Shaw. So in our role as the board are to ensure that, so we're there for, I call it for gray-haired wisdom, but not to micromanage, but we do have management in there that are there to work directly with the various generations of the people that are in that trust.
I love that. That's such a great observation too. And what I love about that is that, Shaw in its form, it was, as I understand it, it was sold to Rogers. So it's no longer in the family, but the family has that. So it's not tied to an asset. And I think that family businesses can benefit from the idea that you don't need to tie all of the family wealth to a single asset, a business. It can actually be a fund for opportunities like a trust like that can be very powerful.
Well, in fact, I think it might even be one of the benefits of not having that, because when Shaw was an entity and we were out there serving customers, there might have been a sense of entitlement amongst the generations, but now it's holy doodle. It doesn't exist. So I have to make my way in a very different way. I have to find my own mentors, and I have to find the things I really am passionate about that I have confidence that I can actually succeed at. But knowing that there is I'll call it a support network that's going to help me to do that, to encourage me to do it.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I like that perspective. I appreciate you sharing that. And I'd like to touch on. I'd like to talk a little bit about your book, Count on Me, which is written about your life. And I mean, just what I've read thus far, it's such a powerful representation. We've talked about some of it. We barely scratched the surface on it today. I'd love for you to share why you wrote the book, and what you're helping to get out. Yeah.
Well, actually, it was Lucy Alinsky that used to work at Shaw, and she was working in the media division. I think I'd met her once. She approached me and said, "Have you ever thought about writing your own biography?" And I said, "Well, I had, because through the course of my life, there's so many people who said, 'Wow, you've got such a diverse background.' I mean, I'm a musician. I love music.
Right.
Music's been my passion for the last 50 years. I've been in bands. I have a recording studio in this home I'm in.
That's something else we have to talk about someday too, because I love music. Yeah, yes.
And my photography, I've photographed the likes of Franco Colombo and Mr. North America contest, which is in the book too. So there was a diverse of interest. I love sports, photography, and music, and business and people. And so it's like the triangle of what is your cerebrum made of? There's a left brain, there's a logical brain, there's a not so logical creative brain, right. And there's a spiritual side to us all. And so people say, "Well, you should write a book." And so I actually started to write a book, and I was writing it on this old computer system that ultimately, unfortunately, died. And so I put it on hold. But interestingly, I'm glad I did, because there was a lot more life to live still from there. So Lucy approached me, and so we went through a process where for about 200 hours, I did a big dump. And we talked about my life, and we would be, do it over at Teams meetings, and she would record those, and we would talk about, some of the things that, just as we are right now, what are the important things? What was the logic behind those? Why did you do this, et cetera? For me, it was about a legacy. I mean, just as we talked about the Shaw Family Trust, I have family as well. I've got 3 sons, and they have children, and I want those children to say, "Well, what was it like for Grandpa Peter or Great Grandpa Peter? What was the world that he lived in? What kinds of influences did his decision have on people? What were his values?" And so, I didn't do this to sell books, frankly, and not that, it's a bad thing. But what I did do it for was a legacy, and and to do it in a way that was kind of consistent with the no animals were hurt in the writing of my book. So there's no deep dark secrets that come out. It's a pretty um, it's a book where we're basically celebrating lives and the people that I've worked with and some of the accomplishments that we've experienced, and to do it in a way that I can tell you that I've been blessed by the people that I've been surrounded by, and whether they be angels who give me an occasional nudge, or whether they be mentors that have really had a significant impact on me. And I could, probably 10 people in my life have been significant mentors and have helped me to make my way through this life. So,
Yeah.
so it was frankly legacy and also learnings. I've talked to so many young people through the course of this and through the course of my life that have said, "Oh my God, I didn't." There was somebody said to me, "I read your book and that part about the talent, and making the best of what God's given you, that really resonated with me. And you don't bury your talents; you basically take advantage of whatever those talents were." And so, to the extent that I'm going to talk to universities and people that are right at the beginning of their career, and I think that there's things that they can learn and that I can impart on them that might help them. Visualization. Maxwell Maltz, his book, Psycho-Cybernetics in 1969, had a huge impact on me. It first of all, it worked for me because it was all about goal orientation. And of course, being a radar technician, that's what we worked on, was things that would, you set a goal, your radar finds it, and then you have feedback mechanisms that help you to achieve that goal. Right. And so, visualization. So things that have helped me to succeed that could help others. And so it is a legacy, both for my direct descendants, but also for other children and grown-ups and people that are making their way of life in this life.
I love that. And if you're listening to this, it can likely be an incredible resource for you, because it's the life story of someone who basically brought themselves up from their bootstraps, from humble beginnings, to becoming the president of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, a publicly traded corporation. And so read the book. It's called "Count on Me: My Life Lessons and Legacy as a Former President of Shock Communications." And I do have one more question for you, Peter, because I think the question of legacy is a big topic. But I'd love to know, what does legacy really mean to you, as far as what you've defined it as?
Legacy there's a sort of qualitative side to it, and it's the qualitative side to legacy that is what you hope can have a positive impact on people that have either worked with me, so they've experienced it firsthand, or those that haven't worked with me, that can, by reading some of the things that were important to me, the way that I coexist, if you will, and I'll say the impact of the ways that I related to people and what were the important values that they can learn from, to essentially make their way in life in a way with a positive, sort of, it's the modeling side of things, the qualitative side of things.
I love that. That's so great. It all comes back to imparting values and you living, and you have lived those core values with integrity. And I'm grateful that you spent this hour with me today. I wish we could spend more hours. I know that your book took 200 hours on this, so those who listened only got a small sample, less than 1% of what really exists within your mind. But if people want to find you, obviously they can get the book "Count on Me." You can find it on Amazon, I imagine.
Yeah.
Where else? Yeah. Where else can people find you?
So Amazon, ingeniumbooks.com, who are the publisher. Mm-hmm. It's going to be in all major bookstores, Amazon, Indigo, Barnes and Noble, and I have, I'm on LinkedIn as well, Peter.Bissonnette, and that's kind of a place where I go for comfort, because there's so many people that have reached out to me since we've written the book and published it, And so the learnings continue. And my role also is to encourage and to congratulate. And so if I can be a mentor to anybody in any positive way, then that's made it all worthwhile.
That's fantastic. What
And
a
Adam,
great life
I,
position.
I really have appreciated being on your show. I think, as I said, when I was looking at you and I thought, and the enthusiasm that you bring to this, I knew that it would be an enjoyable and I think, mutual sharing of your life as well, which is to me has been of a great interest and success.
Oh, thank you so much, and I'm really grateful for those kind words, and grateful that you shared this time with me. It's been an honor, and I look forward to hopefully more conversations with you and learning from you, because I've really enjoyed this, and grateful I got to know you.
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, thank you. And if anybody wants to learn more about Peter Bissonnette, please get buy the book Count on Me, and you will learn great lessons from that about how to implement your values in your business. And Peter Bissonnette on LinkedIn, and follow him there, and yeah, just check out whatever he's doing. And thank you for listening to the show. If you got a lot from it, by the way, and you think that somebody can benefit from this show, please share it with a friend. Get the word out so that we can help make businesses and family businesses better. A rising tide lifts all ships. So let's help each other. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time.